Welcome to the Reel to Reel podcast, where the stories behind the board go on record. I'm your host, Bruce Hensal, and we're here to give an insider's look at the music industry. I'm joined by my co-host, Leo, from the Melrose Audio team.
Hello there, guys.
Today's guest is local artist Beth McKee, an amazing talent, and the charming and talented Deborah Smith-Cahan.
Hi, I'm glad to be here, Bruce. Leo.
Hey,
Thank you, Beth.
thank you for being here.
Please welcome our first guest, Beth McKee, singer, songwriter, keyboardist, and community activist.
Awfully glad to be here, Bruce.
We're happy to have you here.
Yeah, welcome to the Reel to Reel podcast and to the Melrose Center.
I love that you guys are doing this. This is an awesome way to document knowledge.
Yeah.
Well, it's also a great way to have local artists interact with national and possibly international artists.
I'm excited about that.
We're going to ask Beth about how she got her start in music.
Oh, okay. Well, excuse me. I grew up taking piano lessons. Playing the piano at church was my first paying gig, which I started at about the age of, 14. I think they figured that was the best way to make sure I showed up. And was always involved with musical theater and accompanying choral music groups throughout all my school days. Then went and studied in college a non-musical field, the non-musical field of accounting, which is, I don't know why. But after I graduated from college, I moved to Austin, Texas, because I just thought it would be a cool place to live. And I was right, it was. And what I saw there really inspired me, which was a lot of live music happening. And I saw women performing frequently, in bars and in clubs that I was going to, and I kind of realized, maybe I can do that. So I moved back to Mississippi and joined a working blues band and toured the Chitlin circuit and learned lots of good things from Malico recording artists from my hometown of Jackson, Mississippi, and it kind of started there. That was kind of the beginning. After I had been doing that for a while, my friend Greg Fingers Taylor reached out to me, who is also from Jackson, but his job was playing harmonica with Jimmy Buffett. And Buffett had promised Greg that he could put together a band and open for him on his summer tour. So Greg was in the process of putting together an all-female backing blues band. Oh, wow. and he invited me to play keyboards in that group.
That's great.
Yeah, it was the name of the group is the best part. That group was named the Lady Fingers.
Oh, wow. That's perfect.
So yeah, that was, so we had a great summer. So I kind of went from like blue Chitlin circuit to traveling, touring, the United States and some Canadian dates in what had previously been the Silver Bullet bus, a tour bus that had been Bob Seger's tour bus.
Oh, wow.
And
That's great.
and from there, that summer was, eye-opening, and I had moved back to Austin at the time that I got that gig. So by the time the tour ended, I had decided I wanted to move to New Orleans, which is somewhere I'd always wanted to be. So I got a gig with another all-female band that was called Evangeline. And shortly after I joined that band, we were introduced, ironically, to Jimmy Buffett, who I'd been working for all summer, by way of Quint Davis, who is the producer of the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival. So Quint and Jimmy were big buddies, and Jimmy was starting a record label and wanted to find some New Orleans acts, and Evangeline was the act that Quint told Jimmy about. So we all got together, and when Jimmy saw that it was me, I guess it didn't hurt.
Yeah.
So shortly after that, we were signed to his Margaritaville Records by way of MCA Nashville. And so then I kind of guess was off and running by that point.
Well, in the small world category, I recorded some demos with Greg
Oh, really?
at Criteria that Norbert Putnam produced.
Yeah, I remember meeting Norbert Putnam, on the road, because when Evangeline signed with Margaritaville Records, and I was fresh off that summer tour, I told them that I thought we should sign the deal, but that we should tell them we would only sign the record deal if we could open for him the next summer, because it was so much fun and a really good paying gig and in front of lots of people. And so we did that the following summer too. So somewhere in those 2 summer tours, of course, everybody shows up for Buffett concerts when you're in places like the Hollywood Bowl and other venues like that. So Norbert, I think, came to the Nashville or the LA show. There's always a stream of celebrities coming through, including Joni Mitchell, who he brought to one of Evangeline's actual gigs, a bar gig in New Orleans, an old club called the Muddy Waters. And they're like, yeah, Joni's coming tonight.
Wow.
That was a bit of a panic moment, but she was awesome.
Yeah.
Let's take a listen to another track off of Beth's album, Dreamwood Acres. This is In Between the Lines.
Turned out the light. I'll sleep on the floor. Not here anymore. Keep sending. Keep sending. Keep sending.
May I actually had a question for you that's kind of like, just kind of personal. I don't know if you've been recently to Austin, but things have changed a lot.
Yes, they have. Things change everywhere.
Yeah. One of the things that I felt when I went there, I kind of had like this weird, I don't know if call it epiphany about, I felt like Austin is sort of like in my head what Orlando could be in the future, like 10 years in the future, 15 years in the future, as far as the music scene and culture scene. Mm-hmm. Because I was there, let's say I was walking down the main street, I think 6th Avenue or something like that.
Okay, yeah.
And then there was a really great band doing covers of a really known band, and they were doing really great, and no one was there. But if you went to the next bar, there was a guy on a harmonica singing his songs, and he was packed.
There you go.
So people are like really hungry for new music.
Yes, and originality.
Yeah.
And statements, yeah.
And so I felt like the infrastructure and like the vibe of the city a little bit reminded me, like, man, Orlando eventually at some point could potentially maybe become something like that. I don't know. What's your opinion on that?
Well, being from an older generation than you, and having lived in Austin quite a long time ago, more than 2 decades ago, it has changed since then, because then it was more raw. I feel like Austin has kind of gotten polished. And I think that's happened in New Orleans too. I mean, I call it the Brooklynification. All of a sudden, everything looks like little Brooklyn. Like, ugh. Brooklyn's fine, but it's up there. Leave it alone. You know what I always loved about Austin, and one is it definitely was the multiculturalism was always there. And I think Orlando, you're absolutely right, is perfectly poised to benefit and flourish in that way, and that's something I'm totally into. Okay. I think that being in Austin, first of all, I fell in love with Mexican food, with real Mexican food at that point, and I fell in love with Mexican music. When I would hear people in the neighborhood washing their cars and they were playing norteño on their radios, I just lost it. I loved it so much. And the beauty of Orlando is, in my neighborhood now, I hear norteño when people wash their cars. I also hear Colombian opera, and I hear all different reggae, real reggae, you know. So I love that melting pot aspect, and New Orleans was certainly a melting
course,
pot.
yeah.
So I agree. I
Quintessential.
hope that blending the cultures will help, or just bringing them together and recognizing what we have. It's like an asset to me.
Yeah.
It's like an asset of interest, of interesting stuff. So, and I think more people are appreciating different types of things, and I hope more people will be appreciating original music.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Well, let's take a listen to one of the tracks off of Beth's album. And since you got your start in the church, we're going to listen to a snippet of Promised Land.
Okay.
Oh, it sure does entertain. Never thought I'd wind up standing here again. I've been a dragonfly suspended in midair. Whoa, seduced by the notion of life in constant motion. I've found my sacred ground. Here in the promised land. Here I am, standing in the promised land.
And that was The Promised Land by Beth McKee off of her latest CD.
I have it right here. Dreamwood Acres. I'm always double checking my pronunciation.
You said it just right, Leah.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, Beth, I know some of our listeners are aware of your Swamp Sistas organization.
Movement, community, I don't know. Collective, yeah. It has a lot of nouns that describe it.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, back in 2010, as I was touring around basically the southeastern United States, promoting an album that I had released that year, I began to notice a lot of really cool women at my gigs, and they were coming back, and they were so supportive, and they also, many of them were artists too, or, interested in the creative arts, and I thought, God, it would be so nice if I could kind of gather these women into kind of some kind of group or community. So without much thought, I threw a group page up on Facebook and called it Swamp Sistas because, first of all, I live in Florida, swamp. I grew up on a swamp, literally, in Mississippi, on the Pearl River swamp. And my history in New Orleans, swamp, and even my publishing company, my entity for BMI and that kind of stuff for royalty reporting is called Swamp Girl Music. So without much thought, I just said Swamp Sistas, and
Natural.
I said it Sistas with an A, mainly because that's how I pronounce it with my southern accent or my drawl, and also because Swamp Sisters with an ERS.com was already taken. So I embraced that hint from the universe to call it Swamp Sistas. And
I like it.
thank you. Yeah. And I started inviting my friends, these women, and I told them to invite their friends, and it wasn't about me or anything. It was just about bringing people together for sharing and support, was what I said at the time. And it just took off. I mean, everybody liked each other. I've kind of always been good at introducing friends, I think, that become friends. And that group now has over 2,500 members. Plus all kinds of adjunct groups that have hundreds and thousands of members, not hundreds of thousands, but and thousands. Yeah. But it has evolved into, at one point I thought it would be really cool about 3 years later if we could actually get together, sometimes in person. And so bringing from New Orleans with me the idea of a Creole house party called a La La, which is a real thing. That the Creole musicians used to do. They would throw la-las, which would be kind of a house party with a purpose. They'd move all the furniture out of the way and bring in gumbo and beer and lemonade, and musicians would gather and friends would dance, and everybody would throw a little something, what they could afford, into a pot for a community cause. Maybe somebody's electrical bill, maybe somebody's medical bill, maybe their rent, but I just loved that idea. And so I thought the Swamp Sistas could host some la-las. And so that's what we do. And this spring we'll be hosting our 9th annual Swamp Sistas La-La at Orlando Fringe Festival to raise money to help Second Harvest Food Bank of Central Florida feed kids over the summer months when no school means no school breakfast or lunch. And there's a big, strong need. There's a big gap. Income gap in Orlando, and there's definitely a need, especially over the summer months, to help augment the food supply for kids. So that's what we're doing. Last year we raised over $70,000.
My God,
with our
amazing.
La La Summer Hope campaign, which we'll be launching also at the beginning of May and running online at lalasummerhope.com. And with Second Harvest Food Bank's phenomenal distribution methods, that $70,000 was able to provide 200 and almost 30,000 meals for kids over the summer months and for their families. So, it's a movement. It's a movement. It's a community because everybody loves coming together, and it's such an efficient way to make a tangible difference.
Well, and I think the fact that music is involved is probably what gives it a ground.
Right. Yes. Music with a Mission is kind of our little byline, because I have the Swamp Sistas La La Foundation is now a 501c3 nonprofit. Mm-hmm. And we have a bifold mission of helping out in the community and supporting women in the arts, which was kind of part of the original foundation of the Swamp Group. It's like, you guys are so supportive. Let me tell you about my other women friends that are musicians. And so it really fits hand in hand, especially with the La La, to be able to do both of those things, to give women performance opportunities. And now we've expanded those performance opportunities to also women in spoken word and comedy and visual artists also. Because giving hope for kids over the summer months, that's a big deal.
It's real impact right there.
And the need is there. 1 in 5 Central Florida kids will experience hunger insecurity at some point. And that's really shocking to think about. So I'm very happy that we've been able to find this way to come together and celebrate our friendships and feature female talent and feed some hungry kids too.
Well, that's really admirable, Beth.
Thank you. Well, it's just I have nice friends and they're all helping out, so we just do it together.
That's great.
Yeah, I'm coming from South America. Me personally, I grew up listening to a little bit of everything because Colombia is very diverse on that. But it was impactful to me to listen to artists who use their music for a purpose. Because I come from a continent of dictatorships and all these things.
Absolutely, and I think Latin American music is definitely folky in that way.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that I'm hoping that we can transfer to the La La this coming year, because I've decided to incorporate a theme.
Oh, really?
For a portion of the day where we're going to have acts, some duo acts, and I've already confirmed a couple of those, but I'm going to suggest that everyone sing songs of social justice.
Yeah, and I guess what I was kind of leaning to is that I think that what you're doing is the kind of mission that I think the kind of impact that music has or can have when that platform is used in a positive way.
Right.
That's a humble personal goal of mine as an artist myself. But I just, I've seen the real direct impact that you have here, and I am, blown away by it. I work with farm workers on my with my efforts and stuff like that, but I love to see more people doing it because sometimes I feel a little alone on the effort.
Well, I see what you're doing, Leo, and you do a fabulous job.
Oh, thank you for your kindness. But yeah, I just every time I'm just always very grateful there are people like you out there doing that with music. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And again, I just have a lot of nice friends.
Yeah, well.
And I don't mind asking them to do things.
Yeah. Nice.
Well, I think that's great. And that was Someone Came Around by Beth McKee, and you're listening to the Reel to Reel podcast, where the stories behind the board go on record.
Yeah, that was a great song, Beth. I kind of had a question we kind of put together with the audio team at the Melrose Center. We for today's episode, we have like a common denominator of sort of women empowerment through music, and in your personal experience, I'm sure with the Swamp Sistas, how have you seen you kind of giving a platform for women to express themselves? What have you seen? What has been the impact? Like, what can you share about that experience? Yeah.
Well, I think one of my goals have been just kind of try to sort of balance things out a little bit. In a lifetime of playing music, with the exception of being in a couple of all-female bands, I've been in many other bands and many other performing scenarios. And, excuse me, it gets a little bit lonesome sometimes to be the only female in the whole scenario, in the studio, in the band, on the bus, so to speak, simply because, people just, I think, were like me until I went to Austin as a young 20-something and saw women out there, specifically Angela Straley and Luann Barton, that were actually making a living, not, being superstars, but subsisting, and supporting themselves by playing music. And if you don't, until you see that and you see it happening, it's kind of hard to visualize yourself being able to do it.
Yeah.
So I think that, as we do it, the most exciting thing when we have a Swamp Sistas La and all these women are performing on stage, I'm very happy for us. I'm happy for all of us women, but I'm most happy for the little girl that's sitting in the audience looking up at us, realizing, hey, I could do that if I wanted to one day. Just even talking about it gives me chills. It gives me little goosebumps, because the future is everything. And for us to be able to create possibilities for little girls and young women that are coming along, so that they can realize that they can do that too. Yeah,
and in such a positive context. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Also, I understand you do recording at home, songwriting. You want to talk a little about your gear?
Sure. I have a pretty basic scenario. I use an Apollo United Art.
Mm-hmm.
I never can. United Art, UA.
Yeah.
Apollo interface.
It's
that has
United Audio Design.
There you go, UAD. Yeah, which sounds anyway. It's and I use it with an iMac. And I use Logic. I have used Pro Tools in the past, but I much prefer Logic. And because I think I just am a lifetime Apple person, so they have my thought process for the workflow. And I have a few good microphones. So what I tend to do is I get intimidated about, I'll work in the studio by writing a song. I'll write a song on the piano or on my little Wurlitzer without any technology. Then I will demo the song, just in my crazy mind, what I think it could sound like, and maybe use it just on MIDI and just to get the idea and pop it down. Then I'll send that around to a production team. Then when I record, I like to record in a studio with somebody else pushing the buttons, because it's too much to try to be an artist and be a singer and lead the band and deliver your material and make it sound good too. So I like to have a producer or engineer or a producer engineer, which is more and more common these days, to record. And then as we review, and I try to get as much of it in one, in a live setting, because it's not live, but if we play together, it's music. The more people that are playing together. And then for any little extra overdubs, I can usually do those in my home studio with my little rig.
Setup, yeah.
Great, that's handy.
Yeah.
So I use the technology from beginning to almost end. I send it off for mixing and mastering, but those demos sometimes are hard to even recapture. Sometimes they seem like, oh, well, this was,
I've seen a lot of artists spend a lot of money playing Beat the Demo.
right? Didn't Bruce Springsteen do that with Nebraska?
Yeah, he
wound
did.
up using the demo.
He did.
I was inspired by that, so I remind myself every now and again.
Never tells the demo. One thing that you mentioned that was mentioned by Tim on the first episode of the podcast was that obviously it's great that nowadays technology empowers people to do things in the comfort of their home with their laptop. But I agree with you. It's good to see your process is similar. Like you work with people, like you work with, you do have the idea and you do materialize your demo, but then it's great to work with people. I think that's one of the biggest things about music, like, working with producers.
Collaboration is everything.
Yeah, so.
Because I am not enough, I'm not a genius that is like Prince, I can't is fully, I want other people, what they have to bring to their seasoning, their ideas, their frightened looks of, when they hear my ideas sometimes as a filter, I'm constantly bouncing things off of people and seeking. I like collaborating for writing.
That's something I need to mature more into, but I definitely agree in general, like just this is for me is about people, and we all bounce ideas,
Well, in my experience, the strongest product comes from a point of collaboration.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yep.
With the Swamp Sistas, and we also have sort of a collective of performing women and a songwriting group that meets on a regular basis. And our strategy is collaboration over competition, because the music business is it's difficult. And now with technology, more people are in it, which is good, but we're all kind of scrambling around, for the same few crumbs, and it's just not worth it to me and to my sisters too. We agree that we would rather work together to raise the tide for all the boats that are out there trying to float around, instead of trying to bring each other down by some kind of competitive.
Yeah, lift each other up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Amen.
Back to church.
I just want to get a last look at Beth's latest record, Dreamwood Acres. It's right here. You can find it also probably in all the platforms, Spotify and everything like that.
All of those.
Yeah, so one last look here on this episode, and I'm super excited you're here. So thank you.
It's been an honor and a pleasure, and I'm excited for the next portion.
You bet. We'll be right back with our guest, Deborah Smith-Cahan. Welcome back to the Reel to Reel podcast, where stories behind the board go on record. Our next guest is an attorney, songwriter, singer, and monster bass player. Credits include The Poor Girls, Friction, Chai Pig, and Half Cleveland. It's my pleasure to welcome our guest, Deborah Smith-Cahan.
Hello, and hello to you, Uncle Bruce.
Well, welcome to the Reel to Reel podcast. Hope you're having a wonderful day.
Yes, I'm here in not so sunny, beautiful west side of Akron, Ohio.
Yeah, it's probably cold out there right now.
Yes,
Well,
and dark.
The gloom belt.
Exactly.
Well, you and I go back a little ways to
Just a few.
to the mid '70s, and but I was aware of you before that. There was a band called the Poor Girls,
Right.
That was the first all-female band I believe I was aware of as a slightly beyond teenage boy.
I think it was the first I was aware of because I remember thinking, a band, sure, you've got the Shangri-Las, the Marvelettes, on, but with instruments? I had moved to Akron from Detroit in 1964, and how do I say this kindly? I wasn't really blending with my peer group, but found that music became a real unifier. And I was taking guitar lessons along with Sue Schmidt, Horning, and Pam Johnson. We all took guitar lessons from a guy named Joe Cirillo, who's no longer living. But Joe was a wonderful guitar player. He played in a band called the Chambermen. Not the Chamber Pot, the Chambermen. And as we were taking guitar lessons from him, he said, you ought to form a band. And I said, oh, yeah, like with guitars? He said, absolutely. And we did. And as luck would have it, we were in school. Now, it must have been 1965, around 65. There was a female drummer of note, Esther Kerr, and she was a terrific, terrific drummer. And I remember writing her a note because that's what we did, because we didn't have machines that would send a text message, and I wrote her a note and passed her the note and asked her to join our band, and she did, and that was it. That was the Poor Girls, which continued till around June of 1969.
I remember hearing about the fact that some girl played bass with Led Zeppelin in a concert in Cleveland.
I did that. And I think that was maybe a year after graduating from high school. So I think probably around August 1970. What had happened was they were doing a tour. I was a huge fan. And they were stopping in Cleveland at Music Hall. I think Music Hall holds maybe about 20,000 people. I could be wrong. It could have been Public Hall they were playing it. That's right. It was the bigger venue. So bigger than 20, maybe about 30,000. And I was definitely going to the show. And John Paul Jones, who was their bass player, his father had just passed away. So they made an announcement that they were going to do a set and then take a break and do an acoustic set. Now, you've got to know that everybody in the audience, including myself, had come to the concert with the reasonable expectation of having live electric Led Zeppelin, as opposed to some mellow acoustic set, which was, of course, necessitated because John Paul Jones was making an exit to go to the funeral. And I'm sitting in the audience, and there was a wonderful, wonderful promoter for Belkin Brothers named Roger Abrams. In fact, Bruce, I think he's in Miami now.
Yes.
And he's down there somewhere, not too far from you. He knew me and knew of my bass playing and said, come on, you're going to sit in. And I said, okay, which is something that I would have said. And I did. And he just literally led me up on the stage, back behind the curtain. They put John Paul Jones's bass on me, plugged it in, and pushed me out in front of the curtain.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it was terrific.
Wonderful.
That is
great.
awesome.
Once in a lifetime story.
Yeah, that is awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. Playing with lead, man, that's crazy.
Well, after I'd left Akron and come back, I began doing demos with the band. Well, it was Devo at the time, and
Right.
I understand you had a relationship with that band at that point too.
Yes, we did. At that point, now, gosh, Bruce, that might have been pre-Chai Pig or just around the time Chai Pig was forming. And we had, of course, musical relationship with them because the time in Akron was a wonderful time for music, a wonderful time for bands. Music prior to that had been a little, unexciting. I think it was just a general lull. And all of a sudden, there were bands that said, heck, we can do this. We can put out our own single. We can put out our own demo. It'd be lovely to have some big label money behind us, but let's see what we can do. And there was a wonderful spirit and camaraderie amongst all the bands, even though we're all just vying for the same donut, right? Hoping to take a bite and get supported. And Devo certainly did. And you were doing work with them was that at Melrose Studios?
No, I cut their demos at Audio Recording in Cleveland.
Right.
That was when Ken Hayman, the engineer, said, they said, can you make that guitar sound a little thinner? And he said, what? No one was quite prepared for the sound of Devo when it came out.
No, that was certainly unique. The Poor Girls had recorded with Ken Hayman, and I remember him looking at me saying he was going to plug my bass directly into the board. And you know how I feel about that, and let alone having him do it. And he said, I understand just what you want. You want that outsider sound. And I said, no, I don't.
He was mansplaining you.
As politely as possible, because that was a big deal then. The Outsiders were a big, breakout band from Cleveland, if that's what you call it. Not Cleveland, breakout. And somehow, Bruce, there was a blending of the families, and we knew of you, and of course your reputation. You were the recording god, and we were just hopeful, and we did some recording out at Melrose Studio, and I don't really recall, perhaps you do, how we came to be going down the criteria. Certainly the Stiff Records compilation had come out by that point.
I think we had become friends when I had passed through Akron, and but before we get to that story, I want to play a song that Mark Mothersbaugh of Devo wrote the lyrics to, "Ring Around the Collar." From
is it from this?
Yes, it is, and it's in the record that we talked about.
Right.
So let's take a short break and listen to this, and we'll be right back with Deborah Smith-Cahan.
I never trusted you, never turned my back on you, always kept my distance, never wanted to catch it. Now you show up out of nowhere, I only want to see your face, I only want to make it right, I only want to release the mechanism, but you got ring on the collar, ring on the collar, ring on the collar, ring on the collar, and you got it bad. Rubbing it out. I tried wearing it out. I tried tearing it out. But you still got a bad case of.
Welcome back to the Reel to Reel podcast, where the stories behind the board go on record. Our guests this week are Beth McKee and Deborah Smith-Cahan. Hi, Debbie.
Hey.
So we were talking about recording in Miami, and neither one of us can remember why it happened.
or how it happened, but I was so grateful that it happened.
Well, as I recall, we had talked about recording, and I said, if you can find a way to get to Miami, I can get you studio time.
Right.
And Ron and Howard Albert graciously gave us time to record at Criteria in the evening. So we couldn't start until, I believe, after midnight. I think during the day I was either doing Mutiny with Jerome or Julio Iglesias.
Wow.
Right, or both. And somewhere around there, was Black Sabbath might have been in the mix too.
Yeah, they were.
Literally.
They were in Studio C, I think, during the day before we would cut in there at night.
Because I remember when we finally got down there doing some pickup gigs, and I remember the Sabbath roadies acted as our road crew one night.
Yeah, that was that little punk club on South Beach.
Yep.
When South Beach was very different.
I bet it was.
Moon.
Yeah.
Once in a blue moon, something like that.
Exactly. And then there was an evening when the entire band and myself went to the Fountain Blue to see Senor Wences.
That's right.
If I
got to
recall.
tell you, the high point, one of the high points of my life was seeing him. I'm so glad we were together for that because we can verify it to each other.
Well, and you know, that one definitely most of the audience is going to have to Google and see the Ed Sullivan Show to get the Senor Wences.
Yeah, once they do that, they'll understand the significance.
I have a kind of a sneaky question off of the left field. I think that's the expression in English. You know, you coming from Akron, right? How was like the temperature shock when you went to Miami? Because I know it hit me when I first was in Miami. So.
Oh, it was delightful.
Oh
it
yeah.
Was, I mean, number one, there was sun, which we don't see that so much these days till at least maybe April, May, June. You know, the sun will come out in Akron. But the warmth and the sun, and with that, all the energy, it was terrific. It looked, you know, this is before the whole South Beach area was really, really renovated. So it looked classically Jim Jarmusch acceptable in my mind.
It was a wasteland, is pretty much. There was a lot of homeless people in South Beach, a lot of crime, and a punk club. So
punk club here and there, which seemed to just blend with the atmosphere.
Well, and I believe you guys also stayed in the Thunderbird Motel.
Something.
Yeah, and
something similar.
That's where Mutiny was staying, and it wasn't the big home at last rock star houses that most people associate with Criteria.
Hardly. But we got down there, and just the roster of musicians recording in the studio, let alone the list that you were recording at the time, certainly required a lot of oral flexibility, to say the least. It was a wonderful, wonderful time.
That's A-U-R-A-L, right?
A-U-R-A-L, yes. And I just, you know, it was great. We were coming in very late, but thankfully and luckily you'd introduced us to Joe's Cuban Coffee. A thimble was all we needed, literally. And we were awake and we were alive to record, and I think that's the beginning of one of the songs when Sue's heard saying, "Let's just go all night." We'd had a lot of coffee prior to that. It was wonderful. The chance to record with you, once in a lifetime would something like that happen, and we were just so incredibly fortunate to be there at that time, to be there with you. Miami was, I just thought it was exhilarating. Of course, there was that sun factor that we've discussed. And I remember Sue and I going off in Julio's Rolls Royce, which I think, Bruce, correct me, wasn't that a part of his contract that there would be a Rolls waiting for him wherever he landed?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Besides the fact that he owned 3 of them himself anyway. So.
Well, you never know when you're going to need one. And I remember him taking us to his house, and, you know, here's Julio Iglesias, and here's this trio from Akron, Ohio. What are the chances they're going to wind up together at the same time anywhere in the world, let alone in your hands and ears? But we did, and I just remember him and everyone there being really open, really nice. We're all making music here. That's what we're doing. I don't remember too much ego. If there was, I just didn't accept it as part of what could be possibly going on at the time. It was wonderful. Wonderful time.
Debbie, I think Beth has a question for you. So here.
Okay.
Well, it's not so much a question as, I guess, just a statement, or to dial back to your Akron days, and to kind of thank you for what you did with the poor girls and with the Chai Pig, to have been the first at what you did, because I've been in a couple of all-female bands that were with instruments, like you said. And I think if you guys hadn't come along and done that kind of thing first, it might not have occurred to a lot of bands like us that we could do something like that. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's important.
You know, it's a funny thing. Once I got into it, I never considered that I was anything other than a bass player. I didn't think that, in my total ignorance, that gender might play a factor in that, probably just was a blessing in disguise, because I didn't feel inhibited. There were times, however, when we'd use side musicians, and I remember their girlfriends and or wives or partners weren't real happy about their mates, often playing with these women in a basement somewhere. But really, until somebody brought it into question, I played with a drummer once who told me, and I think this is near a quote as I can get, it's a known fact that women cannot play bass as well as men.
Whoa!
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
I'm going to
about what
dispute
I
that.
Said. I think I said next at that point. But
it's funny because just as you were sitting here talking about, that you didn't really think anything about it, I was also having a little inner dialogue of my own and realizing that I feel strongly that women make the best bass players.
Well, I appreciate that.
And because of this sort of supportive mentality, like...
Yeah.
And not diva is, just kind of like being there for the music and making it happen and making it stay together and holding everything together. It seems like
interesting.
A job for women.
None of that ever crossed my mind, Beth. I just was playing bass. I was completely engrossed in playing bass. I think I must have played my bass a minimum of 3 hours a day.
It shows. I mean, it sounds.
Just to get my chops down, just to get to the point, after years and years and years of that, I said, maybe I can just play now.
Yeah.
Right.
And you got some chops, just play. And getting the opportunity to do that was wonderful. And all the musicians I played with, and I was just really happy about playing bass. I got accepted to Berklee College of Music, probably right out of high school or somewhere around there. I believe Joe Walsh wrote me my letter of reference.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
They wanted a letter of reference from a professional musician.
Well,
that's pretty professional.
I got this friend, Joe.
Maybe he'll work. And I got accepted. Well, that was turned out to be the easier part. The harder part was getting tuition together for a private college.
I bet.
And I think they had one scholarship at the time, but you had to have a semester of grades to be eligible for the scholarship, which made no sense, and I ended up not attending and just studying, sight reading, everything I could, just inhaling it all.
You were probably a much better teacher of yourself than anyone at Berkeley would have been.
Oh, maybe not. I still would have liked that opportunity. I think it would have given me another aspect to my playing.
Well, I listened to several of your tracks, and as a musician myself, my humble opinion is you rock the bass. So.
Oh, thank you, thank you, much appreciated.
Yeah.
You're just a memory. I'm just a fool. Damned if you don't. Damned if you do.
I did have a kind of the common denominator of today's episode. I think when Bruce was putting it together, it was about, and I know that you kind of, in your perspective, that is probably much bigger than that, the whole gender thing. Today's, Beth and you kind of have the common denominator of sort of, whether you did it directly or indirectly, you kind of inspire other female performers and kind of show them what can be done and stuff like that. Have you seen your impact as a woman who can inspire other women through what you do? Have you seen that impact anywhere along your career? And this is a question also for Beth. I guess whoever wants to answer first.
Beth, I haven't, which now, looking back at it, seems so odd to me, because certainly...
Well, let's just dial... Wait a second. Sorry to interrupt you. But what about Chrissie Hynde? Did you not impact her?
Oh, whether I had an influence on her or not, I don't know.
Well, according to the internet, you did.
Oh, okay.
And Bruce, too, who said that she was a flat-out groupie of the Poor Girls.
Oh, yeah. We were just great pals and remain that, to this day. And she wasn't in a band at that time. That's right.
Bingo. Sorry.
That's right.
Okay.
So maybe, I just thought we were all literally playing the same song. We were great fans of old rhythm and blues, and we would stay up late at night because after all the other stations went off the air, we could tune in WLAC, which was the Life and Casualty station from Nashville, Tennessee.
Yes.
And they had great DJs. They had the Hossman. They had John R., which was Jonathan Richmond. And WLAC was just our source for hearing Slim Harpo and all old rhythm and blues of the time. We loved the music. We loved that. We'd listen to that. We'd listen to jazz. I never considered that I was an influence on her, but maybe that, I don't think either of us thought we couldn't do it or we couldn't do it because of a gender issue. All the more reason, too, I guess.
Let's take a listen to another song with a kind of an interesting message. It's called SSS. And we'll be right back with our guests Debbie Kahan and Beth McKee. Welcome back to the Reel to Reel podcast, where the stories behind the board go on record. We're here today with our guests Beth McKee and Deborah Smith-Cahan. Well, Debbie, we've listened to a couple tracks. We've had a nice conversation, and I want to thank you so much for being our guest on this episode.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
And want you to give my regards to your husband, Andy, and
I will.
And we'll see you down the road.
And the beat goes on.
Deborah, last thing I wanted to say on behalf of the Melrose Center and the audio team here at the Melrose Center and the video team and all the people working on Reel to Reel, just want to thank you for being a part of this and for sharing your stories with us. We're very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been terrific. Bye, Uncle Bruce.
Thanks for joining us for the Reel to Reel podcast from the Melrose Center. I'm your host, Bruce Hensal, with my co-host, Leo. And I'd like to thank our guests, Beth McKee and Deborah Smith-Cahan.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Beth, also our local hero, for coming out today. Thank you for sharing your music and your stories with us and for being a powerful, beautiful force in the community.
Oh, thank you. Thank you guys for inviting me out. It's been a real delight to chat with you and to get to know Deborah, too, on the telephone.
Our pleasure. Thanks, Beth.